Sarah Martinez thought she had the perfect life. A successful marketing executive in Seattle, a loving husband who owned 3 luxury hotels, and a beautiful penthouse overlooking Puget Sound. But when her husband Marcus decided to hire a live-in maid to help manage their busy lifestyle, Sarah never expected the woman who walked through their door would shatter everything she thought she knew about her past. The maid's name was Elena Rodriguez. She was quiet, hard-working, and had the most unusual birthmark on her left wrist, a crescent moon shape that made Sarah's blood run cold. Because 23 years ago, Sarah's baby sister had disappeared from a hospital in Phoenix, Arizona, and that baby sister had the exact same birthmark. What started as a simple domestic arrangement became a journey into buried family secrets, stolen identities, and a truth so devastating it would change both women's lives forever. This is the story of how a routine Tuesday morning coffee became the moment 2 sisters found each other again, and how sometimes the people we're searching for are hiding in plain sight. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Martinez penthouse as Sarah paced the marble kitchen floor, her bare feet making soft slapping sounds against the cold stone. It was 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in November, and she was already dressed in her charcoal business suit, her long black hair pulled back in the severe bun that had become her trademark at the marketing firm, where she was the youngest senior vice president in company history. But today, she wasn't thinking about the Hartwell Industries campaign that was supposed to launch next week. She wasn't mentally rehearsing her presentation for the board meeting at 10. Instead, she was staring at the espresso machine that had been blinking red for the past 3 days, the dishwasher that hadn't been properly loaded in over a week, and the stack of unopened mail that had grown into a small mountain on the granite counter. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, yanking open the cabinet door to grab her travel mug. Inside, she found exactly 3 clean mugs, 2 mismatched plates, and a single spoon. Everything else was either in the dishwasher waiting to be unloaded or scattered around the penthouse in various stages of abandonment. Marcus emerged from their bedroom, adjusting his navy tie as he walked. At 34, he still had the confident stride of the college quarterback he'd once been, but now that athleticism was channeled into building his hotel empire. The Martinez Hotel Group had started with a single boutique property in downtown Seattle 5 years ago. Now, with locations in Portland and Vancouver, Marcus spent more time in airports than in their own home. "Coffee's not ready?" he asked, glancing at the blinking machine with the kind of mild confusion that told Sarah he genuinely had no idea how to operate it. "Machine's been broken since Sunday," Sarah replied, though she knew it wasn't really broken. It just needed descaling, a 20-minute process that neither of them had found time to tackle. "I'll grab something on the way to the office." Marcus pulled his phone from his pocket, already scrolling through emails. "I'm flying to Vancouver this afternoon for the grand opening prep. Won't be back until Thursday night." Sarah nodded, pouring cereal directly from the box into her travel mug since she couldn't find a clean bowl. It was a Tuesday morning ritual that had become embarrassingly normal. 2 successful professionals eating breakfast like college students because they couldn't manage the basic mechanics of running a household. "We need help," Marcus said suddenly, looking up from his phone. "Real help. This is getting ridiculous." Sarah paused mid-chew. They'd had this conversation before, always in passing, always when they were rushing to get somewhere else, never with enough time to actually solve the problem. "I know we do," she admitted, "but finding someone trustworthy is complicated. They'd have access to everything. Our home, our schedules, our private spaces." Marcus walked to the window, looking out over Elliott Bay, where the morning ferry was cutting through grey water toward Bainbridge Island. What if we found someone live-in? Someone who could handle the day-to-day stuff when we're both traveling? The idea made Sarah's stomach tighten. She'd grown up in a house where privacy was a luxury, where too many people knew too much about family business. The thought of a stranger living in their space, organizing their belongings, witnessing their private moments felt invasive in a way she couldn't quite articulate. But then she looked around the kitchen again, at the takeout containers from 3 different restaurants stacked on the counter, at the dry cleaning that had been draped over the dining room chairs for 2 weeks, at the wedding photo on the side table that was slowly disappearing behind a pile of unopened credit card statements. How would we even find someone like that? She asked. Marcus was already pulling up something on his phone. Elena's Domestic Services. They specialize in live-in arrangements for busy professionals, background checks, references, the whole thing. I looked into them last month when the Vancouver property was having staffing issues. Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. You already researched this? Just preliminary, Marcus said quickly. I thought maybe we could at least get some information. The rain was coming down harder now, turning the city below into a watercolor painting of grey and muted blues. Sarah watched a jogger sprint across the street, hood pulled up against the weather, and wondered when her life had become so complicated that hiring a stranger felt like the simplest solution. What kind of background checks? She asked. Marcus sat down at the breakfast bar, finally giving the conversation his full attention. Full criminal history, employment verification, personal references. They even do psychological evaluations for live-in positions. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Psychological evaluations. Think about it, Marcus said. Someone living in your home needs to be stable, trustworthy, adaptable. They're not just cleaning toilets and doing laundry. They're managing our private lives. The phrase, managing our private lives, made Sarah wince. When had their private lives become something that needed professional management? How much does something like this cost? She asked. Less than we spend on takeout and emergency dry cleaning. In a month, Marcus replied. And definitely less than the cost of both of us having nervous breakdowns because we can't find matching socks. Despite herself, Sarah smiled. Last week, she'd worn 2 different black shoes to a client meeting because she'd gotten dressed in the dark and hadn't noticed until she was already in the elevator at work. What kind of person takes a job like that? She asked. Living with strangers, taking care of their mess. Marcus shrugged. People who need steady work and housing. Students, maybe. People transitioning between life situations. The agency said, they have applicants from all kinds of backgrounds. Sarah walked to the window, pressing her palm against the cool glass. 23 floors below, the city was waking up. People hurrying to work, grabbing coffee, living normal lives that didn't require hiring someone to manage their basic adult responsibilities. I just want to understand what we're signing up for, she said. This person would have keys to our home. They'd know our schedules, our habits, our private business. They'd also know if we're eating actual meals instead of granola bars for dinner, Marcus pointed out. And maybe we'd come home to a place that doesn't look like it was ransacked by very polite burglars. Sarah laughed, but it sounded hollow, even to her own ears. The truth was, she was scared, not of hiring help exactly, but of what it meant about who they'd become. 2 people so disconnected from the basic rhythms of daily life that they needed to pay someone else to live it for them. What if it doesn't work out? She asked. What if we hire someone and they're weird or intrusive or just don't fit? Then we find someone else, Marcus said. It's not a marriage, Sarah, it's a job. But even as he said it, Sarah knew it wasn't that simple. Inviting someone into your home, into the intimate details of your daily routine, was more complicated than a typical employment relationship. This person would see them at their worst moments, would know their vulnerabilities, would become part of the fabric of their lives in ways that most people never were. Can we at least meet some candidates before we decide? She asked. Marcus nodded, already pulling up the agency's contact information. I'll call them this morning, set up some interviews for this weekend. Sarah grabbed her purse and car keys, preparing to face another day of back-to-back meetings and emergency problem-solving. But as she headed toward the door, she stopped and turned back to Marcus. What if we find someone and it changes everything? She asked quietly. Marcus looked up from his phone, confused. Changes everything? How? Sarah couldn't articulate the strange anxiety that was building in her chest. Maybe it was the fear of losing control, of having to adjust their carefully constructed life to accommodate someone else's presence. Maybe it was the deeper fear that they'd reached a point where they needed professional help to live like functional adults. Or maybe it was something else entirely, a strange, inexplicable feeling that once they opened their door to a stranger, nothing would ever be quite the same again. Never mind, she said, forcing a smile. Call the agency. Let's see what happens. As she rode the elevator down to the parking garage, Sarah caught her reflection in the polished steel doors. She looked successful, composed, exactly like the kind of person who could afford to hire live-in help. But behind her professional exterior, something was shifting. A sense of anticipation mixed with dread, like standing at the edge of a cliff and knowing that the next step would either be onto solid ground or into empty air. By the time she reached her car, she'd almost convinced herself that her anxiety was just the normal stress of making a big household decision. Almost. But as she drove through the rain-soaked streets of Seattle, heading toward another day of managing other people's problems, while her own life fell apart one unwashed dish at a time, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to meet someone who would change everything. She just had no idea how right she was. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 3 days later, Sarah found herself sitting in their living room at 2 p.m. on a Saturday, wearing jeans and a sweater instead of her usual armor of business attire. The change in clothes should have made her feel more relaxed, but instead she felt exposed, like she was about to audition for a role she wasn't sure she wanted to play. Marcus had arranged everything with Elena's domestic services. 3 candidates, 30 minutes each, all pre-screened and background checked. Sarah had spent the morning cleaning their already messy penthouse, which felt absurd since they were literally interviewing people to clean for them. But the idea of strangers seeing their chaos felt too vulnerable. The first candidate arrived, exactly on time. Patricia Chen was 45, impeccably dressed, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd spent decades managing other people's households. She had references from 2 tech executives and a federal judge, and spoke about domestic optimization and lifestyle management in the kind of corporate language that made Sarah feel like she was in a boardroom instead of her living room. I implement comprehensive organizational systems, Patricia explained, sitting straight-backed on their white sectional sofa. Digital calendars synchronized with household maintenance schedules, inventory management for pantry and cleaning supplies, coordinated meal planning with dietary preferences and business entertaining requirements. Sarah glanced at Marcus, who was nodding like this all made perfect sense. But something about Patricia's clinical approach made Sarah feel like they were discussing the maintenance of expensive machinery rather than the intimate details of daily life. "What about flexibility?" Sarah asked. "Our schedules change constantly. Sometimes Marcus is gone for a week, sometimes I'm working until midnight on urgent projects." Patricia smiled with the practiced warmth of someone who'd answered this question many times before. "Adaptability is essential in high-level domestic management. I maintain detailed profiles of each employer's preferences and adjust services accordingly. When Mr. Martinez travels, I focus on Mrs. Martinez's individual needs. When you're both working late, I ensure proper nutrition is available without requiring your active participation in meal planning. The phrase, without requiring your active participation, made Sarah's skin crawl. She wanted help with their household chaos, not to be managed like a client who couldn't be trusted to make her own decisions. After Patricia left, Marcus looked optimistic. "She seems incredibly competent," he said. "She seems like she wants to run our lives," Sarah replied. "Did you hear how she talked about implementing systems and optimizing our lifestyle? I felt like I was being evaluated for efficiency." The second candidate was Maria Santos, a 28-year-old graduate student who needed live-in work to help pay for her master's degree in social work. She was warm, genuine, and talked about housekeeping like it was a form of caring for people rather than managing their property. "I grew up in a big family," Maria explained, tucking a strand of curly brown hair behind her ear. "6 kids, and my mom worked 2 jobs, so we all learned to take care of each other. To me, keeping a home isn't just about cleaning. It's about creating a space where people can relax, where they feel taken care of." Sarah found herself relaxing. As Maria spoke, there was something comforting about her approach, something that felt more like having a friend help out than hiring professional management. "What's your long-term plan?" Marcus asked. "How long are you looking for this kind of position?" Maria's expression became more serious. "Honestly, I need about 18 months to finish my degree. I know that might not be ideal for you, since you're probably looking for something more permanent." After Maria left, Sarah felt conflicted. She genuinely liked her, but Marcus was right about the temporary nature being complicated. Training someone, getting used to their presence, building trust, only to have them leave in a year and a half, felt emotionally exhausting. "I liked her," Sarah said. "But maybe we need someone who's looking for something longer term." Marcus was checking his phone, already distracted by work emails. "The third interview is in 20 minutes. Let's see what she's like." At exactly 3:30, there was a soft knock on their door. Sarah opened it to find a woman about her own age, maybe 30, with shoulder-length dark hair and serious brown eyes. She wore simple black pants and a white blouse that looked freshly ironed, and carried a small leather portfolio that appeared to contain copies of references and certifications. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm Elena Rodriguez. Thank you for meeting with me." Elena's voice was quiet but clear, with just a trace of an accent that Sarah couldn't quite place. As they shook hands, Sarah noticed Elena's grip was firm but not aggressive, confident without being presumptuous. "Please come in," Sarah said, leading her to the living room. As Elena settled onto the sofa, Sarah found herself studying her face. There was something familiar about her features, something that made Sarah feel like she'd seen her before, though she couldn't place where. Maybe it was just the general resemblance that people sometimes shared. Dark hair, brown eyes, similar bone structure. "Tell us about your background," Marcus said, settling into his chair with the same interviewing posture he'd used with the previous candidates. Elena folded her hands in her lap and looked directly at both of them as she spoke. "I've been doing domestic work for 8 years, since I was 22. I started with cleaning services, then moved into private household management. For the past 3 years, I've been working for a family in Portland, but they're relocating to London, and I can't make that move." "Why not?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure why the question felt important. Elena's expression flickered, just for a moment, with something that looked like old pain. "I have family obligations here, people I can't leave behind." Sarah felt an unexpected kinship with that answer. She understood about family obligations, about the weight of responsibility that kept you tethered to certain places and choices. "What kind of family obligations?" Marcus asked, and Sarah shot him a look. The question felt too personal, too invasive for a job interview, but Elena didn't seem offended. "I helped take care of my elderly foster mother. She raised me, And now, she needs support. Nothing that would interfere with my work schedule, but I need to be within driving distance. The word foster caught Sarah's attention. She'd grown up with friends who'd been in and out of foster care, and she knew that kind of background often meant complicated family situations, missing pieces, questions without answers. "What do you like most about domestic work?" Sarah asked. Genuinely curious, Elena considered the question seriously before answering. "I like creating order from chaos. There's something satisfying about taking a space that feels overwhelming and making it peaceful again. And I like taking care of people, even in small ways, making sure they have what they need, that their home feels like a refuge instead of another source of stress." As Elena spoke, Sarah felt herself relaxing in a way she hadn't with the previous candidates. There was something genuine about Elena's approach, something that felt less like professional service and more like genuine care. "Do you have experience with live-in positions?" Marcus asked. "Yes, with my previous family. I had my own suite above their garage, and I maintained regular hours, but was available for emergencies or special events. I understand the balance between being helpful and being intrusive." Sarah appreciated that Elena had addressed the privacy issue without being asked. It suggested she understood the delicate nature of living in someone else's space. "What's your approach to handling personal information?" Sarah asked. "I mean, in a live-in situation, you'd inevitably know details about our schedules, our habits, our private lives." Elena met her eyes directly. "Discretion is essential. What happens in your home stays in your home. I'm not there to judge or gossip or involve myself in personal matters. I'm there to make your daily life easier, not more complicated." There was something about the way Elena said it that convinced Sarah she meant it. Not because it was the right professional answer, but because she seemed to genuinely understand the importance of boundaries and respect. They talked for another 15 minutes about practical matters: schedule flexibility, salary expectations, household preferences. Elena answered every question thoughtfully, without seeming desperate for the job or overly eager to please. She was professional but not cold, warm but not presumptuous. As the interview was winding down, Elena reached into her portfolio and pulled out a folder. "I brought copies of my references and certifications, including my background check results." As she handed the folder to Marcus, her sleeve rode up slightly, and Sarah caught a glimpse of Elena's left wrist. There, just above the delicate bones of her wrist, was a small birthmark, a crescent moon shape, dark against her olive-toned skin. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The folder slipped from Marcus's hands, papers scattering across the coffee. "Our table, sorry," Marcus said, bending to collect the scattered documents. Clumsy, but Sarah wasn't paying attention to the papers. She was staring at Elena's wrist, at the birthmark that was identical to one she'd seen in old photographs, in medical records she'd studied obsessively as a teenager, in dreams that had haunted her for over 2 decades. "Mrs. Martinez?" Elena's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you all right?" Sarah blinked, realizing she'd been staring. "Yes, sorry. Just tired. Long week." But her heart was racing, and her hands were trembling as she helped Marcus gather the scattered papers. On one of the documents, Elena's birth certificate, Sarah caught a glimpse of a date that made her stomach drop. Elena Rodriguez, born March 15th, 1994, Phoenix, Arizona, the same city where Sarah's baby sister had disappeared from Phoenix Children's Hospital 23 years ago, the same date that had been burned into Sarah's memory since she was 7 years old. "When can you start?" Marcus was asking, apparently having decided to offer Elena the position while Sarah was having her small breakdown. "I could start next Monday if that works for you," Elena replied. Sarah forced herself to focus on the conversation, to act normal, even though her entire world had just tilted sideways. "That's perfect," she heard herself saying. "We'll have the guest suite ready for you." After Elena left, Marcus turned to Sarah with satisfaction. "She's perfect, don't you think? Professional but personable, experienced but not overbearing." Sarah nodded absently, but she wasn't thinking about Elena's qualifications. She was thinking about a crescent-shaped birthmark and a birth date that couldn't be a coincidence. She was thinking about a baby sister who'd vanished from a hospital 23 years ago, and how sometimes the people you've spent your whole life looking for walk through your front door carrying references and asking about work schedules. "Sarah?" Marcus was looking at her with concern. "You seem distracted. Are you having second thoughts?" "No," Sarah said quickly. "No second thoughts. I think Elena will work out perfectly." But as she said it, she realized she had no idea just how perfectly or how complicatedly things were about to work out. Because if Elena Rodriguez was who Sarah thought she might be, their simple domestic arrangement was about to become the most important relationship of Sarah's life. She just had to figure out how to prove it without destroying everything. Elena arrived on Monday morning at exactly 8 a.m., carrying 2 suitcases and a small houseplant that she explained helped purify the air. Sarah watched from the kitchen window as Elena paid the taxi driver and stood for a moment on the sidewalk, looking up at their building with an expression Sarah couldn't quite read. "She's here," Sarah called to Marcus, who was rushing around their bedroom looking for his passport. He was flying to Vancouver again, this time for a 3-day investors conference that couldn't be rescheduled. "Great timing," Marcus called back. "You can get her settled while I'm gone, figure out the routine without me interfering." Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety at the prospect of spending 3 days alone with Elena, especially with the questions that had been consuming her thoughts all weekend. She'd spent hours on Sunday night digging through old family documents, staring at the few photos she had of her baby sister Isabella, trying to convince herself that she was imagining similarities that weren't really there. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw that crescent-shaped birthmark and felt the strange certainty that her world was about to change completely. Elena's knock was soft but confident. When Sarah opened the door, she found Elena dressed in dark jeans and a simple grey sweater, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked younger somehow, less formal than she had during the interview. "Good morning, Mrs. Martinez. I hope I'm not too early. Please call me Sarah, and no, this is perfect. Come in." Sarah led Elena through the penthouse, showing her the layout and explaining their basic routines. Elena listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions about preferences and schedules, but Sarah found herself distracted by small details. The way Elena unconsciously touched her left wrist when she was thinking, the slight tilt of her head when she concentrated, the way she said certain words with just a hint of an accent that sounded almost familiar. "The guest suite is through." "Here," Sarah said, opening the door to what had been their rarely used spare bedroom. Marcus had arranged for it to be furnished with a bed, dresser, and small sitting area. There was an ensuite bathroom and a mini-fridge, making it completely self-contained. Elena set down her suitcases and walked to the window, which overlooked Elliott Bay. "This is beautiful," she said softly. "I've never lived anywhere with a view like this." "Where did you live before?" Sarah asked, trying to sound casual. "A small apartment above the garage at my previous job. It was comfortable, but nothing like this." Elena turned from the window. "I want you to know I understand this arrangement requires adjustment for both of us. If there's anything that makes you uncomfortable, please tell me. I want this to work." Sarah appreciated Elena's directness, but it also made her feel guilty about her hidden agenda. "I think we'll figure it out as we go," she said. "Marcus is traveling until Thursday, so it'll just be us for a few days. After Elena settled in, Sarah tried to go about her normal Monday routine. She made coffee, checked emails, prepared for her 10 a.m. video conference with the Hartwell Industries team. But she kept finding excuses to walk through the main living areas where Elena was working. Elena moved through their space with quiet efficiency, but not in the invasive way Sarah had feared. She didn't rearrange things or impose her own organizational systems. Instead, she seemed to understand the logic of how Sarah and Marcus lived and simply made it work better. The mail got sorted and put in logical places. The kitchen counters were cleared but not sterilized of all personality. Clean laundry appeared folded in their bedroom, without Sarah even noticing when it had been moved. By noon, Sarah realized she'd been watching Elena work for the better part of the morning instead of focusing on her own job. During a break between conference calls, she found Elena in the kitchen, unpacking groceries that Sarah hadn't even realized they needed. "I hope you don't mind," Elena said, noticing Sarah's surprised expression. "I noticed you were low on basics, and I know a few markets that deliver. I kept the receipts for reimbursement." Sarah looked at the counter, now stocked with fresh fruits, vegetables, and actual meal ingredients, instead of their usual collection of energy bars and frozen dinners. "How did you know what to buy?" Elena smiled, the first genuinely relaxed expression Sarah had seen from her. "I looked at what you already had and tried to fill in the gaps. Plus, I noticed the takeout containers in the recycling. Figured you might appreciate having some home-cooked options." "You cook?" "I enjoy it. Is that something you'd want? I can prepare meals or just keep ingredients available for you to cook, whatever works better." Sarah felt an unexpected wave of emotion. When was the last time someone had offered to cook for her? Not as a professional service, but as a gesture of care. "I'd love that," Sarah said. "We're both terrible cooks. We've been living on delivery food and whatever doesn't require actual preparation. What kinds of food do you like?" It was such a simple question, but Sarah realized she couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked her about her preferences rather than her professional opinions or business decisions. "I grew up eating a lot of Mexican food," Sarah said. "My grandmother made incredible tamales and pozole. I haven't had anything like that in years." Elena's expression shifted, becoming more interested. "Where did you grow up?" "Phoenix, mostly. My family moved around a lot when I was little, but we settled there when I was in elementary school." Sarah watched Elena's face carefully, looking for any reaction to the mention of Phoenix. Elena nodded, but her expression had become more guarded. "I've spent time in Arizona," she said neutrally. "Oh, where?" "Different places. I moved around a lot too." Elena began putting groceries away, signaling the end of that line of conversation. Sarah wanted to push, to ask more questions, but something in Elena's body language warned her off. Instead, she watched Elena organize their pantry with practiced efficiency, noting how Elena's hands moved, the way she arranged things, the small unconscious habits that seemed eerily familiar. That evening, Sarah came home from work to find their apartment transformed, not drastically. Elena hadn't redecorated or rearranged furniture, but the subtle chaos that had become their normal was gone. Surfaces were clear, things were in logical places, and there was a wonderful smell coming from the kitchen. "Something smells incredible," Sarah called as she hung up her coat. Elena appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing an apron over her jeans. "I made pozole. I hope that's okay. You mentioned your grandmother's cooking, and I thought you might be homesick for those flavors." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "You made pozole? It's probably not exactly like your grandmother's recipe, but I tried to keep it traditional." Sarah followed Elena into the kitchen, where a large pot was simmering on the stove. Elena lifted the lid, and the scent that rose up was so powerfully familiar that Sarah had to grip the counter to steady herself. "How did you—" Sarah began, then stopped. How did you learn to make pozole exactly the way my grandmother did? How did you know to add the specific combination of spices that I remember from childhood? How did you recreate a taste I haven't experienced in 15 years? I learned from someone who was very important to me, Elena said quietly. Someone who taught me that food is one of the ways we show love. Sarah accepted the bowl Elena offered her and took a careful sip. The taste transported her instantly to her grandmother's kitchen in Phoenix, to Sunday afternoons when the whole extended family would gather around the table, to the last time she'd felt truly connected to her Mexican heritage before life became about corporate success and professional achievement. This is perfect, Sarah said, and she meant it. It tastes exactly like home, Elena suggested. Yes, exactly like home. They ate dinner together at the kitchen island, something Sarah rarely did, even when Marcus was in town. Usually, they ate in front of the television or at their desks, multitasking even during meals. But Elena had set the table properly, with cloth napkins and the good dishes that usually only came out for entertaining. "Tell me about your grandmother," Elena said as they ate. Sarah found herself talking about family memories she rarely shared, her grandmother's tiny kitchen that somehow produced enormous family feasts, the way she'd spoken to Sarah in rapid Spanish when she was excited or angry, the stories she'd tell about growing up in Guadalajara and coming to America as a young bride. "She sounds wonderful," Elena said. "Do you still have family in Phoenix?" Sarah's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Not really. My parents died in a car accident when I was in college. Most of my extended family has scattered." "I'm sorry," Elena said, and something in her voice made Sarah look up. "What about you? You mentioned family obligations." Elena was quiet for a long moment, stirring her pozole without eating. "I don't have much family left either. The woman who raised me is in a care facility now. Early onset dementia. She's only 65, but she doesn't remember me most days." "That must be heartbreaking." "It is, especially because she's the only family I've ever really known. I was adopted as a baby, and she was my foster mother for most of my childhood. When I aged out of the system, she let me stay. She's the closest thing to a real family I've ever had." Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. "You were adopted as a baby?" Elena nodded. "From Phoenix, actually. I don't know much about my birth family. The records were sealed, and my adoptive parents died when I was 3. That's when I went into foster care." The pozole suddenly tasted like cardboard in Sarah's mouth. Phoenix, adopted as a baby. The timing would be exactly right. "Do you ever wonder about your birth family?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Elena's expression became guarded. "Again. Sometimes, but I try not to think about it too much. They gave me up for a reason, and dwelling on questions I can't answer doesn't help anyone." Sarah wanted to tell her that maybe they hadn't given her up by choice, that maybe there had been a mistake, a tragedy, a loss that had haunted another family for 23 years, but she couldn't figure out how to say any of that without sounding crazy. Instead, she helped Elena clean up dinner and thanked her, even for the meal. But as she got ready for bed that night, Sarah's mind was racing. Every conversation, every detail Elena had shared fit perfectly with what Sarah knew about her missing sister. The timeline, the location, the circumstances of Elena's adoption, but how could she be sure? And if she was right, how could she tell Elena without destroying the trust they were just beginning to build? Sarah lay awake until nearly 2 a.m. staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out how to approach the most important conversation of her life. Because if Elena Rodriguez was really Isabella Martinez, then everything was about to change for both of them. She just had to find the courage to ask the right questions. Tuesday morning brought an unexpected crisis at work that should have consumed Sarah's entire attention. The Hartwell Industries campaign had hit a major snag when their primary spokesperson was caught in a scandal that made national headlines. Sarah spent the morning in emergency meetings, fielding panicked calls from clients and coordinating with the PR team to completely restructure a campaign they'd spent months developing. But even as she managed the professional chaos, part of her mind kept drifting to Elena. During a brief break between crisis calls, Sarah found herself searching her desk drawers for the folder she'd kept hidden there for years. It was buried beneath old client files and office supplies, a manila envelope she'd labeled personal documents in her careful handwriting. Inside were photocopies of everything she'd been able to gather about her sister's disappearance. Hospital records, police reports, newspaper clippings, and most importantly, the medical bracelet information that included details about Isabella's distinctive crescent-shaped birthmark. Sarah spread the documents across her desk, her hands trembling slightly as she reread information she'd memorized long ago. Isabella Martinez, born March 15, 1994, at Phoenix General Hospital, disappeared from the hospital's nursery on March 18, 3 days old. The investigation had concluded that someone had taken the baby, but no suspects were ever identified and no evidence was ever found. The description of Isabella's birthmark was detailed in the medical records. Distinctive pigmented nevus on left wrist, approximately 1.2 centimeters in length, crescent-shaped, dark brown coloration. Sarah had stared at this description thousands of times over the years, wondering if she'd ever see that exact mark again. Now she was almost certain she had. Her phone buzzed with another urgent text from the Hartwell team, dragging her attention back to the immediate crisis. But for the rest of the day, Sarah felt like she was operating in two different realities. In one, she was a competent marketing executive handling a professional emergency with skill and efficiency. In the other, she was a woman who might have just found the sister she'd spent 23 years missing. By the time Sarah got home that evening, she was emotionally exhausted from compartmentalizing her thoughts all day. She found Elena in the living room, quietly reading a book while dinner simmered in the kitchen. Elena looked up when Sarah entered, immediately noting her stressed expression. "Rough day?" Elena asked, closing her book and giving Sarah her full attention. The worst, major client crisis that required putting out about 15 different fires simultaneously. Sarah collapsed onto the sofa, feeling the weight of the day settling on her shoulders. "Can I get you something? Tea? Wine? I made chicken enchiladas for dinner, but they won't be ready for another hour." Sarah felt that same unexpected wave of care that had hit her the night before. When was the last time someone had noticed her stress and immediately thought about how to help? "Wine sounds perfect," Sarah said, "but you don't have to wait on me. Taking care of me personally isn't part of your job description." Eleanor smiled as she headed toward the kitchen. "Maybe not officially, but I think taking care of people is just part of who I am." While Elena was getting wine, Sarah noticed the book Elena had been reading was sitting open on the coffee table. It was a well-worn paperback about genealogy research and finding missing family members. Sarah's pulse quickened as she read the chapter titles: Searching Adoption Records, DNA Testing for Family Connections, Navigating Sealed Documents. Elena returned with 2 glasses of wine before Sarah could process what the book might mean. "Thank you," Sarah said, accepting the glass and trying to act normal despite the racing of her heart. "What were you reading?" Elena glanced at the book, and for a moment her composed expression flickered with something that looked like vulnerability. "Just something I picked up at the library. Probably silly, but I've been curious about genealogy research lately." "Are you thinking about searching for your birth family?" Elena sat down on the opposite end of the sofa, curling her legs under her. "I don't know. Maybe. Part of me has always wondered, but part of me is afraid of what I might find. Or what I might not find. Sarah chose her words carefully. What do you mean? What if I search and discover that my birth parents really didn't want me? What if there's some terrible reason I was given up? Sometimes ignorance feels safer than potentially devastating knowledge. Sarah felt her throat tighten. If Elena was Isabella, the truth was the opposite of devastating. It was a miracle. But she couldn't say that without revealing her suspicions. What if the truth is something wonderful? Sarah asked quietly. What if your birth family has been looking for you too? Elena took a sip of wine, considering the question. Do you really think that's possible after all these years? I think families don't stop loving someone just because they're separated, Sarah said, thinking about all the years she'd spent wondering about Isabella, keeping her memory alive. Even when everyone else had moved on, Elena was quiet for a long moment, staring into her wineglass. The woman who raised me, Maria, before the dementia, used to tell me that I had a family somewhere who loved me. She said that sometimes babies get lost, not because they're unwanted, but because of circumstances beyond anyone's control. Sarah's heart began beating so hard she was afraid Elena might hear it. She sounds like a wise woman. She is. Was. Elena's voice became sad. It's one of the reasons I'm thinking about genealogy research now. She always encouraged me to search, but I was too scared. Now that her memory is fading, I feel like I'm running out of time to honor her advice. Sarah saw an opening and took it, despite her nervousness. Have you considered DNA testing? I've heard that's become much more accessible now. I've thought about it, but what if I take the test and no one else in my family has taken one? What if I get results back that tell me about genetic heritage but don't actually connect me to any living relatives? What if you do get a match? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elena looked at her with sudden intensity. Why do you ask? You seem very interested in this topic. Sarah felt caught, exposed. She scrambled for a reasonable explanation that wouldn't reveal her true suspicions. I guess I've always been fascinated by family stories. The idea of people finding each other after years of separation. Elena nodded, but Sarah sensed she wasn't entirely convinced by the explanation. What about your family? You mentioned your parents died, but do you have any siblings? The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. This was it, the perfect opening to tell Elena the truth. But the words stuck in her throat. How do you tell someone you've just met that you think they might be your long-lost sister? How do you explain that you've been analyzing their birthmark and birth date and wondering if they're the answer to 23 years of questions? I had a sister, Sarah said finally, a baby sister, but we lost her when she was very young. Elena's expression became gentle, sympathetic. I'm so sorry. That must have been devastating for your family. It was. My parents never really recovered, and Sarah stopped, not trusting herself to continue without breaking down. You blamed yourself, Elena said quietly. Sarah looked up, startled by the accuracy of Elena's observation. How did you know that? Because that's what older siblings do. We feel responsible for protecting the younger ones, even when we're just children ourselves and have no real power to change anything. The understanding in Elena's voice made Sarah's eyes fill with tears. I was only 7. There was nothing I could have done, but I still felt like I should have somehow prevented it. Elena moved closer on the sofa, her expression full of compassion. What happened to her? Sarah took a shaky breath. This was it, the moment when she could tell Elena everything. About Isabella's disappearance, about the years of searching, about the birthmark she'd noticed on Elena's wrist. But fear held her back. What if she was wrong? What if Elena wasn't Isabella, and Sarah's revelation just made her uncomfortable and destroyed their growing friendship? What if Elena was Isabella, but learning the truth traumatized her or made her feel obligated to have a relationship with Sarah that she didn't actually want? She disappeared from the hospital when she was 3 days old, Sarah said, deciding to share part of the truth without revealing her suspicions about Elena's identity. Someone took her. The police investigated, but they never found her. Elena's eyes widened. "Oh my God, Sarah, that's horrible. Your parents must have been destroyed." They were. They spent years looking for her, following every lead, hoping for any news. It consumed their lives. I think part of them died when she disappeared. Elena reached out and squeezed Sarah's hand. The gesture was spontaneous, caring, and it made Sarah notice once again how Elena's fingers looked similar to her own. "Do you still think about her?" Elena asked. "Every day," Sarah admitted. "I wonder what she looks like now, what kind of person she became, whether she's happy. I wonder if she knows she has a family who never stopped loving her." Elena was quiet for a moment, processing what Sarah had shared. "Do you think you'll ever find her?" Sarah looked directly into Elena's brown eyes, seeing something there that made her heart race. "I hope so. I have to believe that someday, somehow, we'll find each other again." Elena squeezed her hand again, and Sarah noticed the way Elena's thumb unconsciously traced over her left wrist, right where the crescent-shaped birthmark was hidden beneath her sweater. "I hope you do find her," Elena said softly. "I hope she knows how lucky she is to have a sister who never gave up looking for her." As they sat there holding hands, Sarah felt the weight of unspoken truths hanging between them. Elena was being kind, offering comfort for what she thought was an old tragedy. But Sarah was sitting across from someone who might be the answer to every prayer she'd said for the past 23 years. The kitchen timer chose that moment to chime, breaking the spell. Elena reluctantly let go of Sarah's hand and went to check on dinner. But as Sarah watched her move around the kitchen, noting the way she carried herself, the unconscious habits, the familiar gestures, she felt more certain than ever that Elena Rodriguez was really Isabella Martinez. She just had to find the courage to prove it. Wednesday evening brought an unexpected development that changed everything. Marcus had called to say his Vancouver meetings were running late, and he wouldn't return until Friday, which meant Sarah had another full day alone with Elena. But this time, instead of feeling anxious about the situation, Sarah felt a sense of opportunity. She'd spent most of Wednesday at work researching DNA testing companies and adoption search services, using her lunch break to make discreet phone calls about how to approach family reunification cases. By the time she got home, Sarah had formulated a plan that felt both terrifying and necessary. Elena was in the kitchen preparing what smelled like her grandmother's famous mole recipe, another impossibly familiar scent that made Sarah's chest tight with recognition. But tonight, Sarah was determined to move beyond hints and coincidences toward actual proof. "That smells incredible," Sarah said as she hung up her coat. "Is that mole?" Elena smiled, stirring the complex sauce that was simmering on the stove. "My foster mother Maria's recipe. She learned it from a woman she worked with who was from Oaxaca. It takes all day to make properly, but I thought you might enjoy it." Sarah felt another piece click into place. Her grandmother had always made mole the traditional way, spending entire days grinding spices and carefully balancing the complex flavors. It wasn't something you learned casually. It was a recipe passed down through generations of women who understood that food was love, made tangible. "I brought something home from work," Sarah said, setting her briefcase on the counter. "A DNA testing kit. I thought maybe we could both take the test, for the genealogy research you mentioned." Elena paused in her stirring, turning to look at Sarah with surprise. "You bought DNA tests?" "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about searching for your birth family, and I realized I've been curious about my own family history too." My grandmother always told stories about relatives in Mexico, but I've never really traced our lineage properly. It wasn't entirely a lie. Sarah had always wondered about her extended family, but the real reason for the DNA test was sitting 3 feet away from her, carefully adding chocolate to a mole sauce that tasted exactly like home. Elena set down her spoon and leaned against the counter. That's very thoughtful of you, but are you sure you want to do this together? What if we get results that are complicated? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with possibilities that Elena probably couldn't even imagine. What in kind of complications? Sarah asked, though her heart was already racing with the implications. I don't know. Family secrets, unexpected connections, things that change how we understand ourselves. Elena's voice was careful, as if she was thinking through each word. Sometimes the truth is more complex than we expect. Sarah studied Elena's expression, wondering if there was some deeper meaning behind her caution. Are you afraid of what you might find? Elena was quiet for a long moment, absently touching her left wrist in that unconscious gesture Sarah had noticed several times. Sometimes I have dreams, Elena said finally. Dreams about a little girl with dark hair who calls me Isabella. I wake up feeling like I've lost something important, but I can never remember what. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Isabella. Elena had just said the name Isabella. Isabella, Sarah managed to whisper. Elena looked startled, as if she hadn't meant to reveal that detail. It's probably nothing, just random dreams that don't mean anything. But Sarah's hands were trembling as she opened her briefcase and pulled out the DNA testing kits. Elena, can I ask you something? Have you ever wondered if your name might have been different when you were born? Elena's expression became guarded. Why would you ask that? Sarah took a deep breath, knowing she was about to cross a line she couldn't uncross. Because 23 years ago, my baby sister Isabella disappeared from a hospital in Phoenix. She would be exactly your age now. She had a distinctive crescent-shaped birthmark on her left wrist. The silence that followed was deafening. Elena stared at Sarah with an expression of shock that slowly transformed into something that looked like recognition. You noticed my birthmark, Elena said quietly. It wasn't a question. The first day you were here. During the interview, I've been trying to convince myself it was just a coincidence, but everything about you, your age, your birthplace, the fact that you were adopted as a baby, it all fits. Elena slowly rolled up her left sleeve, revealing the crescent-shaped mark that had haunted Sarah's dreams for over 2 decades. I used to make up stories about this birthmark when I was little. I pretended it was a sign that I came from somewhere special, that I had a family who was looking for me. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. We were looking for you. I never stopped. Looking for you. Elena's hand moved to cover her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Sarah, this can't be real. I have documents, Sarah said, her voice shaking. Medical records that describe your birthmark exactly. Hospital records. From the day you disappeared. I've carried this information with me for years, hoping that someday you'd find me. Elena finished, her voice barely audible. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak without completely breaking down. Elena sat down heavily on one of the kitchen stools, staring at her own wrist, as if seeing the birthmark for the first time. All these years, I wondered why I felt so drawn to Mexican culture, why certain foods and songs felt familiar, even though I'd never experienced them before, why I sometimes felt homesick for a place I'd never been. Because it was your heritage, Sarah said. Our heritage. Abuela Maria, our grandmother, she made mole exactly the way you're making it now. She taught me to speak Spanish, told me stories about our family in Guadalajara, made me promise to keep our traditions alive. Elena looked up at Sarah with tears streaming down her face. Abuela Maria, that was your grandmother's name. Our grandmother's name, Sarah corrected gently. Elena. covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. My foster mother. Her name was Maria, too. She always said she chose that name because it felt right, because it reminded her of someone important. I never understood what she meant. Sarah moved around the counter and hesitantly placed a hand on Elena's shoulder. Maybe she understood something the rest of us didn't. Maybe she knew you belonged with that name. Elena looked up, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes bright with something that looked like hope. If this is true, if you're really my sister, then I haven't been alone all these years. I've had family. You've always had family, Sarah said firmly. You just didn't know where to find us. Elena stood up and, without hesitation, wrapped her arms around Sarah in a fierce hug. Sarah felt 23 years of grief and longing collapse into this single moment of connection. Elena smelled like the kitchen spices she'd been cooking with, like the rose oil she used in her hair, like home, in a way that Sarah had never expected. I used to dream about having a sister, Elena whispered against Sarah's shoulder. Someone who would understand me, who would know where I came from. I used to dream about finding you, Sarah whispered back, about bringing you home. They held each other for what felt like hours, both crying and laughing and trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. Finally, Elena pulled back and wiped her eyes. We should still do the DNA test, she said, to be absolutely certain. Sarah nodded. Of course. But Elena, Isabella, even if the test confirms what we both already know, this doesn't have to change. Anything you don't want it to change. I'm not trying to disrupt your life or force a relationship you don't want. Elena, Isabella, smiled through her tears. Are you kidding? I've been searching for my family my entire life. Finding out that my family has been searching for me too is the most beautiful thing I can imagine. Sarah felt a weight she'd carried for over 2 decades finally begin to lift. So what do we do now? Now we finish making mold together, Elena said, turning back to the stove where the sauce was still simmering, and we start figuring out how to be sisters. As they worked side by side in the kitchen, adding the final touches to a recipe that had been passed down through generations of women in their family, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since she was 7 years old: completeness. The missing piece of her family had been returned, not through years of searching or private investigators or desperate hope, but through the simple act of needing help with laundry and having Eleanor walk through their door. There's something I need to tell you, Elena said as they stirred the mold together. When I saw the job posting for this position, something about the address felt familiar. I almost didn't apply because it seemed too strange, too much like a sign that couldn't possibly be real. Sarah looked at her curiously. What do you mean? The address. It's 6 blocks from the hospital where I was born, where I was taken from. I used to take the bus past this neighborhood when I was visiting Maria, and I always felt drawn to it without understanding why. Sarah's eyes widened. You were drawn back here. Maybe that's how family works, Eleanor said softly. Maybe love is stronger than distance, stronger than time, stronger than all the circumstances that try to keep people apart. As the mole finished cooking and they sat down to share the meal together, Sarah realized that everything in their lives had led to this moment. All the decisions, all the coincidences, all the years of searching had somehow conspired to bring them together in the most unexpected way possible. Her little sister had come home. Thursday morning brought a reality that neither Sarah nor Elena had fully considered during their emotional reunion the night before: how to tell Marcus. Sarah woke up to find Elena already in the kitchen, making coffee with the nervous energy of someone who hadn't slept much. The DNA test kits sat on the counter between them, like evidence of a secret they weren't sure how to share. Did you sleep at all? Sarah asked, noting the dark circles under Elena's eyes. A little. I kept waking up thinking I'd dreamed the whole thing. Elena handed Sarah a cup of coffee, her hands slightly shaky. This is real, isn't it? You're really my sister? It's real, Sarah confirmed, though she understood Elena's disbelief. After 23 years of searching, finding Isabella felt almost too extraordinary to accept. There's something I didn't tell you last night, Elena said, sitting down across from Sarah at the kitchen island. About why I really took this job. Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety. What do you mean? Elena pulled out her phone and showed Sarah a news article from 3 months ago. The headline read, Seattle marketing executive donates $50,000 to Phoenix Children's Hospital Missing Persons Foundation. Sarah stared at the article, which featured a photo of her at a charity fundraiser. She remembered the event. It had been a corporate obligation, but she'd chosen to support the Missing Persons Foundation because of their work on cases like Isabella's disappearance. I saw this article when I was looking for work in Seattle. Elena explained. When I read about your donation and the foundation you supported, something about your story felt familiar. I researched you, found out about your marketing firm, and when the domestic services agency mentioned they had a client named Martinez, I knew I had to apply. Sarah felt her world tilt slightly. You sought me out specifically? Not consciously. I told myself I was just curious about someone who supported missing children cases. But looking back, I think some part of me recognized you. Some part of me knew we were connected. Before Sarah could process what this meant, her phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and Sarah felt a jolt of panic. She hadn't even begun to figure out how to explain the situation to her husband. Hi, Marcus, she answered, trying to sound normal. Good morning, beautiful. How's everything going with Elena? Is the arrangement working out? Sarah looked across the kitchen at Elena, who was listening to the conversation with obvious anxiety. It's going really well, actually better than I expected. Great. I'll be home around 6 tonight. Maybe the 3 of us can have dinner together and I can properly welcome Elena to the team. Sarah felt her throat tighten. The idea of sitting through a normal dinner conversation while hiding the truth about Elena's identity felt impossible. Marcus, actually, there's something I need to tell you about Elena. Something unexpected has come up. Elena was shaking her head frantically, gesturing for Sarah to stop. Clearly, she wasn't ready for Marcus to know the truth yet. What kind of unexpected something? Marcus asked, his tone shifting to concern. Sarah scrambled for a reasonable explanation. Elena mentioned she might need to leave Seattle sooner than expected. Family obligations. I thought you should know before you get too comfortable with the arrangement. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Elena looked relieved that Sarah hadn't revealed their discovery, but Sarah felt guilty about deceiving Marcus. Oh, well, that's disappointing but understandable. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. See you tonight. After Sarah hung up, Elena slumped against the counter. I'm sorry. I panicked. I'm not ready to tell anyone else yet. Why not? Elena was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. Because once we tell people, it becomes real in a way that we can't take back. And because I'm scared. Scared of what? Scared that Marcus will think I'm some kind of fraud who manipulated my way into your lives. Scared that your friends will think I'm trying to take advantage of you. Scared that once the novelty wears off, you'll realize that having me as a sister is more complicated than you expected. Sarah reached across the counter and took Elena's hand. None of those things are going to happen. How can you be sure? Because families don't work that way. Real families, I mean. The connection we have isn't going to disappear because other people have opinions about it. Elena squeezed Sarah's hand but still looked uncertain. What if Marcus doesn't understand? What if he thinks this whole situation is too weird, too complicated? Sarah had been wondering the same thing. Marcus was practical, logical, someone who dealt in concrete facts and business relationships. The idea of his wife discovering that their maid was actually her long-lost sister might be more than he could easily accept. "We'll figure it out together," Sarah said. "But we can't keep this secret forever, especially if you're going to stay here, if we're going to build a real relationship." "Am I going to stay here?" Elena asked. "I mean, what happens now? Do I keep working as your housekeeper? Do I move out and we try to be sisters from a distance? Do we pretend the last few days never happened?" Sarah realized they'd been so focused on the emotional impact of their discovery that they hadn't thought through the practical implications. Elena was right. The situation was incredibly complicated. "I don't want you to leave," Sarah said. "But I also don't want you to feel like you have to stay out of obligation. This has to be your choice." "What would you want if you could have anything?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "I'd want you to stay, but not as my employee. I'd want you to stay as my sister. I'd want us to have time to get to know each other, to figure out who we are as adults, to build the relationship we should have had all along." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "I'd want that too. But how do we make that work practically? I need a job, a place to live. I can't just be your dependent sister." "You could work for the marketing firm," Sarah suggested suddenly. "We're always looking for people with organizational skills and attention to detail. It would be legitimate employment, not charity." Elena looked surprised. "You'd hire me?" "I'd recommend you for hire, but you'd have to earn the position on your own merit. I wouldn't do you any favors professionally just because we're family." "I appreciate that," Elena said. "I need to know that I'm capable of building my own life, not just sliding into yours." They were interrupted by a knock at the door. Sarah answered it to find a delivery person with a large floral arrangement. The card read, "Welcome to the Martinez household. Looking forward to getting to know you better. Marcus." Sarah stared at the flowers, feeling the weight of Marcus's kindness and the guilt of keeping such a massive secret from him. He sent, "You flowers," Sarah told Elena, bringing the arrangement into the kitchen. Elena read the card, and her expression became even more conflicted. "He's a good man, isn't he?" "He is. Which is why this is so hard. He deserves to know the truth." Elena was quiet for a long moment, absently arranging the flowers in the vase. "What if we tell him tonight? After dinner? When we're all relaxed?" Sarah felt a mix of relief and terror. "Are you sure you're ready?" "I don't think I'll ever feel ready." "But you're right. We can't build a real relationship while hiding the truth from your husband." The rest of Thursday passed in a strange, suspended animation. Sarah tried to focus on work, but found herself constantly distracted by thoughts of the evening ahead. Elena spent the day researching Seattle job markets and apartment listings, preparing for whatever changes might come after their revelation to Marcus. By the time Marcus arrived home that evening, both women were wound tight. With nervous energy, he walked into an apartment that smelled like Elena's cooking and looked more organized and welcoming than it had in months, but the atmosphere was charged with unspoken tension. "Something smells incredible," Marcus said, kissing Sarah hello, and nodding politely to Elena. "And these flowers look beautiful. Thank you for the welcome arrangement." "Thank you for sending them," Elena replied, her voice carefully controlled. During dinner, Marcus made genuine efforts to get to know Elena, asking about her background and her experience with household management. Elena answered honestly, but carefully, sharing details about her work history while avoiding the personal information that would reveal her connection to Sarah. Sarah watched the interaction with growing anxiety. Marcus was being his usual charming, thoughtful self, and Elena was responding with the quiet professionalism she'd maintained during her interview. To an outside observer, it looked like a perfectly normal conversation between an employer and employee, but Sarah could see the strain in Elena's posture, the way she carefully edited her responses, the guilt that flashed across her face every time Marcus made a kind comment about her work or expressed appreciation for her help. After dinner, as they sat in the living room with coffee, Sarah caught Elena's eye and nodded slightly. It was time. "Marcus," Sarah began, her heart pounding. "Elena and I have something we need to tell you. Something that's going to sound unbelievable." Marcus looked between them with mild curiosity. "Okay, what's going on?" Sarah took a deep breath and realized that everything was about to change. Not just for her and Elena, but for all three of them. Because the truth was rarely simple, and families, even rediscovered ones, were never without complications. "Elena isn't just our housekeeper," Sarah said. "She's my sister, my baby sister Isabella, who disappeared 23 years ago." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at them both, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to something that looked almost like betrayal. "What?" he finally said. Marcus stood up abruptly, running his hands through his hair as he began pacing between the coffee table and the window. His face cycled through expressions of disbelief, confusion, and something that looked dangerously close to anger. "This is insane," he said finally, his voice tight with control. "You're telling me that the woman I hired to help manage our household is actually your sister, your dead sister?" "She was never dead," Sarah said quietly. "She was missing. There's a difference." Marcus stopped pacing and turned to face them, both. "How long have you known?" Sarah felt Elena tense beside her. This was the moment she'd been dreading, explaining to Marcus that they'd been living with this secret for days. "I suspected from the first day," Sarah admitted. "Elena has a birthmark that matches the description in Isabella's medical records. Same birth date, same birth city, same circumstances. The first day," Marcus's voice rose slightly. "You've known this for almost a week, and you didn't tell me?" "I wasn't certain," Sarah said, though she knew how weak that sounded. "I needed to be sure before I said anything." Marcus looked at Elena, who had been sitting silently throughout this exchange. "And you? When did you figure it out?" Elena met his gaze directly, her voice steady despite the obvious tension. "Yesterday, when Sarah showed me her sister's medical records and we compared them to my own adoption paperwork." "Adoption paperwork that you just happened to have with you?" Marcus asked, his tone skeptical. "I've been researching my birth family," Elena explained. "I brought the documents because I thought I might need them if I decided to pursue genealogy testing." Marcus sat back down heavily, looking between Sarah and Elena like he was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "So let me understand this correctly. Elena applied for a job with us, even though she suspected some connection to Sarah." Elena's cheeks flushed, but she nodded. "I saw an article about Sarah's donation to a missing children's foundation. Something about her story felt familiar, so when the domestic services agency mentioned a client named Martinez, I requested the assignment." "You requested it?" Marcus's voice was dangerously quiet. "So this wasn't a coincidence. You specifically sought us out." "Not consciously," Elena said quickly. "I didn't know Sarah was my sister. I just felt drawn to apply for the position." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Drawn to apply. Right. And then you moved into our home, gained access to our private lives, and conveniently discovered that you're Sarah's long-lost sister." Sarah felt anger flare in her chest. "Marcus, that's not fair. Elena didn't manipulate anything." "Didn't she?" Marcus stood up again, his composure finally cracking. "Think about this rationally, Sarah. A woman shows up claiming to be your missing sister, and suddenly you're ready to welcome her into our family. This is exactly how con artists operate." Elena went very still, her face pale. "You think I'm running a con?" I think this is an extraordinary coincidence that benefits you tremendously, Marcus said. You go from being a live-in maid to being part of a wealthy family. That's quite an upgrade. Sarah shot to her feet, furious. Elena isn't interested in our money. She's my sister. According to what evidence? Marcus demanded. A birthmark that could belong to thousands of people. A birth date that's public. Record, adoption papers that could be forged. According to 23 years of missing her, Sarah said, her voice shaking with emotion. According to the fact that she makes my grandmother's recipes exactly right, that she has the same unconscious gestures I remember from when Isabella was a baby, that she feels like family in ways I can't explain. Marcus's expression softened slightly at Sarah's obvious pain, but his skepticism remained. Sarah, I understand how much you want to find your sister, but wanting something to be true doesn't make it true. Elena stood up quietly, her dignity intact despite the accusations flying around her. Mr. Martinez, I understand your concerns. From your perspective, this must look very suspicious. It does, Marcus admitted. Then, let's resolve it properly, Elena said. Sarah and I both submitted DNA samples for testing yesterday. We'll have definitive results within a week. Until then, I think it's best if I find other accommodations. Elena, no, Sarah protested. You don't have to leave. Yes, I do, Elena said firmly. Marcus is right to be protective of you and suspicious of my motives. I would feel the same way in his position. Marcus looked surprised by Elena's reasonable response. He'd clearly expected her to fight to stay or become defensive about his accusations. I don't want to cause problems in your marriage, Elena continued. Whether I'm your sister or not, that relationship is more important than my presence here. Sarah felt tears of frustration burning her eyes. This is ridiculous. Marcus, you're treating Elena like she's some kind of criminal. I'm treating her like someone who appeared in our lives under unusual circumstances and is making extraordinary claims, Marcus replied. That's called being cautious. It's called being cruel, Sarah shot back. The argument might have escalated further, but Elena's quiet voice cut through the tension. He's not being cruel, Sarah. He's protecting you. That's what people who love you are supposed to do. Elena's defense of Marcus seemed to surprise him. He looked at her with something approaching respect for the first time since their revelation. However, Elena continued, I need you both to understand something. I'm not trying to take advantage of anyone. I've been searching for my birth family my entire life, not because I wanted their money or their status, but because I wanted to know where I came from. I wanted to understand why I felt like I was missing pieces of myself. She rolled up her sleeve and showed them both the crescent-shaped birthmark. This mark has been my only clue about my identity for 30 years. When I saw it described exactly in Isabella Martinez's medical records, it wasn't a convenient coincidence. It was the answer to every question I'd ever had about myself. Marcus studied the birthmark, his expression thoughtful. Have you had that mark examined by a dermatologist? Could it have been created artificially? Elena nodded. I brought my complete medical records, including dermatological examinations from childhood. The mark is a congenital nevus, present from birth. It can't be faked or created. Sarah appreciated that Elena was addressing Marcus's concerns seriously rather than dismissing them as paranoia. It showed a level of maturity and understanding that Sarah hoped Marcus would recognize. What about other family members? Marcus asked. If Sarah is your sister, there should be other relatives who could verify the connection. Elena's expression became sad. Our parents died when Sarah was in college. I never had the chance to know them. Sarah's the only immediate family either of us has left. Marcus looked at Sarah. What about extended family? Cousins, aunts, uncles? Sarah shook her head. Most of our relatives were in Mexico, And we lost touch after my parents died. I was so focused on building my career that I didn't maintain those connections. Marcus sat down again, looking frustrated. So we have no independent verification of family relationships, no witnesses who could confirm Elena's identity. We have the DNA test, Sarah reminded him, which won't be back for a week, Marcus pointed out. And even then, DNA can confirm biological relationships, but it can't confirm intentions. Elena gathered her composure and addressed Marcus directly. What would convince you that my intentions are genuine? Marcus considered the question seriously. Honestly, time. If you're really Sarah's sister, then this relationship will develop naturally over months and years. If you're running some kind of long-term con, eventually you'll make a mistake or reveal your true motives. So, you want me to prove myself? By staying away, Elena said. I want you to prove yourself by not rushing into anything, Marcus corrected. By taking this slowly and letting the truth emerge naturally. Sarah felt caught between two people she cared about. She understood Marcus's protective instincts, but she also felt in her bones that Elena was exactly who she claimed to be. What if we compromise? Sarah suggested. Elena moves out for now, but we continue spending time together while we wait for the DNA results. That way Marcus can feel more comfortable about the situation, and Elena and I can still build our relationship. Elena nodded. I think that's fair. I can find a temporary apartment nearby, and maybe we can have dinner together a few times a week. Marcus looked between them, clearly still unconvinced but willing to accept the compromise, and no financial support until we have definitive proof, he added. Sarah started to protest, but Elena held up a hand. That's completely reasonable. I have savings, and I can find other work while we sort this out. Marcus studied Elena's face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. Whatever he saw there seemed to ease some of his suspicion. You're either the most elaborate con artist I've ever met, or you really are who you claim to be, he said finally. Elena smiled sadly. I hope the DNA test will answer that question for all of us. As the evening wound down and they made arrangements for Elena to move to a hotel the next day, Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions. She was grateful that Elena had handled Marcus's suspicions with such grace, but frustrated that her husband couldn't see what seemed so obvious to her. Most of all, she was scared that Marcus's doubts would poison the relationship she was just beginning to build with her sister, because whether or not the DNA test confirmed what she already knew in her heart, Sarah was certain that Elena Rodriguez was Isabella Martinez. She just had to hope the truth would be enough. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor that changed everything. Sarah was at her office, trying to focus on work while obsessively checking her phone for messages from Elena, when her assistant knocked on her door. There's a woman here to see you, Jennifer said. She says it's about a personal matter. Her name is Detective Linda Reeves from Phoenix PD. Sarah's blood ran cold. The only reason a Phoenix detective would want to speak with her was if something had happened related to Isabella's case. But Isabella was sitting in a hotel room 3 miles away, preparing to start a new job search. Send her in, Sarah said, her hands trembling as she cleared her desk. Detective Reeves was a woman in her 50s, with graying hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything about Sarah's office in a single glance. She wore a simple black suit and carried a thick manila folder. Ms. Martinez, thank you for seeing me without an appointment. I'm Detective Reeves from the Phoenix Police Department. I work cold cases, specifically missing children. Sarah's heart began pounding. Is this about my sister Isabella? It is. We've had some developments in her case that I need to discuss with you. Detective Reeves sat down across from Sarah's desk and opened her folder. 3 days ago, we received a call from a hospital administrator in Portland, Oregon. A woman named Maria Vasquez is dying, and she's been asking to speak with police about a baby she helped disappear 23 years ago. Sarah felt the world tilt around her. Maria Vasquez? Yes. Does that name mean anything to you? Sarah's mouth was dry. That's the name of Elena's foster mother, the woman who raised her. Detective Reeves leaned forward, suddenly very interested. Elena? Elena Rodriguez. We think she might be Isabella. My sister. The detective's expression became intense. Ms. Martinez, where is Elena Rodriguez right now? At a hotel here in Seattle. Why? What did Maria Vasquez tell you? Detective Reeves pulled out a digital recorder. May I record this conversation? What I'm about to tell you is part of an active investigation, Sarah nodded, though her hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together. Maria Vasquez worked as a nurse at Phoenix Children's Hospital in 2001. Detective Reeves began. On March 18, 2001, she was on duty when your sister Isabella disappeared from the nursery. According to her deathbed confession, she didn't witness a kidnapping. She participated in one. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. What? Maria Vasquez claims that she was approached by a man who said he was Isabella's biological father. He told her that he wanted to take his daughter back, but that your family was preventing him from having contact. He convinced her that helping him take the baby was an act of mercy, not a crime. Sarah stared at the detective, trying to process what she was hearing. That's impossible. My father was Isabella's biological father. According to Maria Vasquez, this man provided documentation that appeared to prove his paternity. She was young, naive, and wanted to believe she was helping reunite a father with his child. So she helped him take Isabella from the hospital. But where has Isabella been all these years? Who was this man? Detective Reeves consulted her notes. The man's name was Roberto Rodriguez. He was Maria Vasquez's cousin, and he was working with an illegal adoption ring that sold babies to families who couldn't adopt through legitimate channels. Sarah felt sick. Sold babies. Roberto convinced Maria that he was Isabella's father, but he was actually planning to sell her to a couple who had paid for a newborn. However, something went wrong with that transaction. The buyers backed out at the last minute, and Roberto was left with a baby he couldn't return and couldn't sell. So what did he do? He panicked and gave Isabella to Maria, telling her the baby was now her responsibility. Maria had always wanted children, but couldn't have any of her own. She saw it as a sign that she was meant to be Isabella's mother. Sarah was trying to piece together the timeline. So Maria raised Isabella as Elena? Yes. She moved from Phoenix to Portland, changed the baby's name to Elena Rodriguez, and created false documentation to make it appear that Elena was her biological daughter. She truly believed she was saving the baby from an uncertain fate. Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions, relief that Isabella had been loved and cared for, but rage that someone had stolen her sister and built a life on a lie. What happened to Roberto Rodriguez? He died in a car accident in 2003. Maria says she was relieved when he died because she was afraid he might try to take Elena away from her or expose what they had done. Detective Reeves pulled out a photograph. Ms. Martinez, is this the woman you know as Elena Rodriguez? Sarah looked at the photo and nodded. It was clearly Elena, though the picture appeared to be several years old. This photograph was in Maria Vasquez's personal effects. On the back, she had written, Elena, my beautiful Isabella. Sarah stared at the photograph, her eyes filling with tears. She knew Elena was really Isabella. She's known from the beginning. According to her confession, she's been living with the guilt for 23 years. She says that as Elena grew up asking questions about her birth family, Maria realized the magnitude of what she had participated in, Then why didn't she come forward sooner? Detective Reeves's expression became sympathetic. She was terrified of losing Elena and going to prison. But now that she's dying and Elena is an adult, she wanted to make things right. Sarah wiped her eyes with a tissue. Does Elena know any of this? That's what I need to find out. We need to speak with Elena to confirm her identity and get her statement about what she knows of her early childhood. Sarah felt protective instincts flare. Elena doesn't know anything about this. She thought she was adopted through legitimate channels. Learning that her entire life was built on a kidnapping is going to devastate her. I understand this is difficult, Detective Reeves said gently. But Elena is the victim here, not the perpetrator. She was stolen from your family as an infant. She has every right to know the truth about what happened to her. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from Elena. Found a nice apartment near downtown. Can we have lunch today? I need to tell her, Sarah said. I need to prepare her for this before you interview her. Detective Reeves nodded. That's probably best. But I do need to speak with her within the next day or two. This case has been open for 23 years, and we finally have answers. After Detective Reeves left, Sarah sat in her office staring at the photograph of Elena that the detective had left behind. On the back in faded ink were the words, Elena, my beautiful Isabella. Maria Vasquez had known all along that she was raising a stolen child. She had loved Elena genuinely, but that love had been built on a crime that had destroyed Sarah's family. Sarah called Elena immediately. Sarah, I was just thinking about you. I found an apartment with a great view of the Sound, and there's a little market downstairs that reminds me of... Elena, I need to see you right away, Sarah interrupted. Something has happened. Something about your past. Elena's voice became concerned. What kind of something? I can't explain over the phone. Can you meet me at the hotel? I'm leaving the office now. Of course. Sarah, you're scaring me. I know, I'm sorry. I'll be there in 20 minutes. As Sarah drove to Elena's hotel, she tried to figure out how to explain that the woman Elena had loved as a mother had actually participated in kidnapping her. How do you tell someone that their entire life history is a lie, even when the truth means they're finally coming home? When Sarah reached Elena's hotel room, she found Elena pacing nervously by the window. What's going on? Elena asked immediately. You sounded terrified on the phone. Sarah sat down on the bed and patted the space next to her. Elena, what I'm about to tell you is going to be very difficult to hear, but I need you to know that none of this is your fault, and it doesn't change how I feel about you. Elena sat down, her face pale with worry. Just tell me. Sarah took a deep breath and began to explain about Detective Reeves's visit, about Maria Vasquez's confession, about the man named Roberto Rodriguez, who had stolen a 3-day-old baby from a hospital nursery 23 years ago. Elena listened, in complete silence, her face cycling through expressions of disbelief, horror, and heartbreak. When Sarah finished, Elena was crying quietly. She knew, Elena whispered. Maria knew I wasn't really her daughter, and she never told me. She loved you, Sarah said gently. That part was real. But everything else was a lie. My name, my history, my entire identity. Elena wiped her eyes. How am I supposed to process this? Sarah reached for Elena's hand. One day at a time, with people who love you supporting you. Elena looked at Sarah with desperate eyes. Do you still want me as your sister? Now that you know how I came to be Elena instead of Isabella? Sarah felt her heart break at the question. Elena, you are Isabella. You've always been Isabella. The name doesn't matter. What happened to you doesn't change who you are or how much I've missed you. Elena collapsed against Sarah's shoulder, sobbing, with a grief that seemed to come from the deepest part of her soul. Sarah held her sister and cried too, mourning the family they had lost and the years they had missed, but also feeling grateful that after 23 years of questions, they finally had answers. Painful answers, but answers nonetheless. 6 weeks later, Sarah stood in the kitchen of their penthouse, watching Elena teach Marcus how to make proper mole sauce. The DNA test results had arrived 3 weeks ago, confirming what everyone already knew in their hearts. Elena Rodriguez was indeed Isabella Martinez, and the crescent-shaped birthmark that had haunted Sarah's dreams for 23 years was finally where it belonged. In her family's kitchen, attached to her sister's wrist as she stirred chocolate into the complex sauce their grandmother had perfected decades ago. "No, no," Elena was saying, laughing as Marcus tried to add cumin to the mixture. "That's not even close to the right spice. Here, smell this first." Marcus inhaled the scent of the toasted chilies Elena held out to him and made a face. "How do you make this taste like food instead of punishment?" "Practice," Elena replied, gently taking the wooden spoon from his hands. "And respect for the process. You can't rush mole. It takes time to develop properly." Sarah smiled, remembering similar conversations between Elena and herself just weeks ago. Marcus had been skeptical about Elena's identity until Detective Reeves had shown him the evidence from Maria Vasquez's confession. Even then, he'd remained cautious about letting Elena back into their lives until the DNA results eliminated any remaining doubt. But once Marcus accepted that Elena was really Sarah's sister, he'd thrown himself into the process of getting to know her with characteristic determination. He'd helped Elena find a legitimate apartment near their building, recommended her for a position with the marketing firm's operations department, and had somehow appointed himself as Elena's guardian against any future people who might try to take advantage of her. "The secret," Elena continued, adding a small amount of dark chocolate to the sauce, "is understanding that every ingredient has to contribute something specific. Nothing is there just to fill space." "Is that a cooking metaphor or a life philosophy?" Marcus asked. Elena considered the question seriously. "Both, I think. I've spent my whole life feeling like I was filling space in other people's stories. Maria's story about being a mother, the foster system's story about finding homes for children, even the story I told myself about being content with not knowing my past. But now I realize I was never meant to fill space. I was meant to contribute something specific." Sarah felt her eyes well up with tears, as they had frequently over the past few weeks. The adjustment period hadn't been easy for any of them. Elena had struggled with anger and grief over Maria Vasquez's deception, even while mourning the woman who had loved her despite the circumstances of their relationship. Sarah had battled guilt over the years of searching that had led nowhere, and Marcus had wrestled with his protective instincts and his desire to trust Elena's genuine character. But somehow they were building something real together. Not the fairy tale reunion Sarah had imagined as a child, but something better, a relationship between 3 adults who chose to love each other despite the complicated circumstances that had brought them together. "Dinner's almost ready," Elena announced, tasting the mole and nodding with satisfaction. "Sarah, can you set the table? And Marcus, maybe open that bottle of wine you've been saving for a special occasion." "What makes tonight special?" Marcus asked, though he was already moving toward their wine collection. Elena glanced at Sarah, a small smile playing around her lips. "Tell him." Sarah felt her heart begin racing. She'd been planning this moment for days, but now that it was here, she felt nervous about Marcus's reaction. "I've been thinking about something," Sarah began, watching Marcus uncork the wine. "About names and identity and what it means to belong somewhere." Marcus paused in his wine opening, sensing the gravity of what Sarah was about to say. "Elena has been living with a name that was given to her under false circumstances," Sarah continued, "but she's also been Elena for 23 years. That identity is real, even if its origins were complicated. Elena nodded encouragingly. Go on. So I've been thinking that maybe the solution isn't to choose between Elena and Isabella. Maybe the solution is to honor both. Marcus set down the wine opener and gave Sarah his full attention. What are you suggesting? Sarah took a deep breath. I want to legally adopt Elena as my sister. I want her to become Elena Isabella Martinez Rodriguez. That way, she keeps the name she's lived with, but she also gets back the name she was born with. And she officially becomes part of our family. Marcus blinked, processing the suggestion. You want to adopt your biological sister? I want to make it legally impossible for anyone to ever question her place in this family again, Sarah said. Firmly. Detective Reeves said there might be more investigations as they look into the adoption ring Roberto Rodriguez was involved with. I want Elena to have legal protection, and I want there to be no ambiguity about her rights as my sister. Elena's eyes filled with tears. You would do that? I should have done it weeks ago, Sarah replied. But I wanted to make sure it was what you wanted. Elena looked between Sarah and Marcus, her expression vulnerable. Are you sure? Both of you? Because once we do this, I'm not just someone who's staying with you temporarily. I'm family permanently. Marcus walked over to Elena and, to her surprise, pulled her into a hug. Elena, you've been family since the moment you proved Sarah wrong about her terrible coffee-making skills. The paperwork is just a formality. Elena laughed through her tears, hugging Marcus back. You know your coffee skills aren't much better, right? That's what I have sisters-in-law for, Marcus replied. To keep me humble and properly caffeinated. Over dinner that night, as they shared the mole Elena had perfected and the wine Marcus had been saving, they talked about practical plans for the future. Elena's job at the marketing firm was going well, and she decided to finish her degree in social work with a focus on family reunification services. She wanted to help other families who had been separated by circumstances beyond their control. Detective Reeves thinks there might be other children who were victims of the same adoption ring, Elena explained. Maria's confession opened up several cold cases that had been inactive for years. Would you be willing to help with those investigations? Sarah asked. Elena nodded. I think I have to. If my experience can help bring other families back together, then maybe something good can come from all the pain. Marcus refilled their wine glasses and raised his in a toast. To Elena Isabella Martinez Rodriguez for finding her way home, despite impossible odds. To Sarah, Elena replied, for never giving up the search. To unexpected families, Sarah added, and the people who helped them find each other. As they clinked glasses, Sarah realized that this wasn't the ending she had imagined when she was 7 years old and promising her dying parents that she would find Isabella someday. She had pictured a dramatic reunion, tears of joy, and an immediate return to the family they had lost. Instead, she had found something better. She had found a sister who was strong enough to handle the truth about her past, wise enough to forgive the people who had hurt her, and generous enough to build new relationships while honoring the ones that had shaped her. 3 months later, at the courthouse where Elena's adoption was finalized, Detective Reeves attended as a witness. She had become something of a friend to both sisters, helping them navigate the legal complexities of Elena's situation and keeping them updated on the investigation into Roberto Rodriguez's adoption ring. You know, Detective Reeves said as they walked out of the courthouse, in 25 years of police work, I've never seen a missing person case end quite like this one. How do most of them end? Elena asked. Usually with more questions than answers, Detective Reeves admitted, or with families that have grown too far apart to reconnect meaningfully. But you two found a way to bridge 23 years and build something new. Elena looked at Sarah, who was talking animatedly with Marcus about plans for a celebration. Dinner. "I think we had help," Elena said quietly. "From Maria, in her way. From Roberto's cousin, who felt guilty enough to confess. From Marcus, who learned to trust, even when the situation seemed impossible. From Detective Reeves, who took an old case seriously enough to follow new leads." Detective Reeves smiled. "Maybe that's how families really work. Not just the people who share blood, but all the people who choose to help love find its way home." As they walked toward Marcus's car, Elena slipped her arm through Sarah's. "Ready to go home, sister?" Sarah squeezed Elena's arm, feeling the solid reality of her presence. "I've been ready for 23 years. And for the first time since she was 7 years old, Sarah Martinez felt complete. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.